Okay, Barbara, we are live.
Good evening, everyone. I'm raising my glass. If Marc were here, this would be champagne and he'd have a glass as well. I want to welcome you all to the National Virtual Book Launch of Marc Greaney's book, Relentless, which is his 20th published novel and 10th Gray Man. And last year, if you recall, Marc's book was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So let's drink to doing that again, Marc. Congratulations.
Let's do it. Thank you very much, Barbara and Patrick. Thanks for having me.
Patrick held up a copy. They just arrived today, fresh from Marc's hand in Memphis. I can only say, thank God they left Memphis before the blizzard hit, or we wouldn't even be looking at them. But as you can see, Marc personally signed our books, and we still have some unclaimed copies. So if you'd like to celebrate with Marc and with us, please order one while we still have them, because we're really excited about it. Now, I did also, Marc, for an extra touch, I don't know if you can see them, I have these fabulous tulips here. And if you were here, we'd have had the whole bit, the champagne, tulips that match, the whole thing. And we'd be going out to dinner afterward, but
I know.
Unfortunately, we can't do that. However, Marc, because this is so special, we thought we'd have a little surprise for you.
Okay.
So I'm going to let Patrick kick it in.
Well, let's see. I don't have it yet, but
All right.
there will be
All right.
there will be a surprise coming.
Hold on for just a moment. So Marc, tell us about it while we're waiting for the surprise. Tell us about the weather in Memphis.
Well, right now it's about 10 degrees and the wind chill's 5 or 6 below, which for Memphis, it's the deep south and it's really, really cold. We had maybe 6 to 8 inches of snow today and sleet, and that never happens. I literally, the year I graduated from high school, 85, I remember we had a lot of snow, and there may be in a couple of years since that we've had this much snow.
It might shock you to know that we had an actual snowstorm in Scottsdale a couple of weeks ago. I walked out of the store and there was sleet on my windshield. We had snow on the ground. Rob made a snowball, a ceremonial snowball, and gave into my office to lob it.
A snowball, yeah. He collected all the snow.
You know, what can I say? It looked really funny to see the snow over the cactus, but you know, that's the way it is here. But you know, having grown up in Chicago, I do miss the snow. And you have a real fire behind you. Is this your gorgeous new office?
Yes, this is. I moved in May, and this is the previous owner built this small house for his parents who lived on his property, and I've converted it into my office, but there's also a guest room and some other stuff. So it's 34 steps out my back door, and then I'm totally, sheltered off from everything else that goes on in the house and everything. So it's worked out really good.
Well, that's well for you, because you have how many dogs?
I have 3 dogs and 3 stepchildren now. So not to conflate them in any way. I'm just saying that there's potentially a lot of distractions.
I can certainly see that. I saw a nice post on Instagram of you walking your dogs in the snow, and I thought, what fun for them. Yeah, our little dog was totally confused. It was like, what is going on out here?
Yeah.
Well, our one of our surprises, maybe. Well, I should just before I disappear from the screen, I just want to tell everybody watching on Facebook that I'll be monitoring the questions. So go ahead and send them in, and I will pop up, in 40 minutes or so if you have any questions for Marc. So
that'll be great. This might be a somewhat longer program than we usually would do, but we're certainly encouraging all of you to ask questions. It'll be wonderful. There goes Patrick into the black abyss. I love it when that happens. Well, look, here they come.
Whoa.
How wonderful. So we have Brad Taylor coming on. We have Joshua Hood coming on. We have Don Bentley. I see Jack Carr is still a black hole.
Yeah. We have Jack Carr's name.
I'm here. I'm here.
Jack, you're there.
Oh, man. There we go. Hold on. There we go.
There's
what's going on, man.
Figured it out in the new office. What's up, buddy?
Hey,
so Marc, we're missing, let me think, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're missing one more, but we thought we would give you a real surprise party tonight.
That's awesome. Thanks for everybody getting together. I know that's not necessarily easy logistically to put this together. I appreciate it. It's good to see everybody.
I have driven them crazy with my inability to conceptualize how we were going to do that. So guys, you've been really good natured and you haven't yelled at me as I've emailed you more than once. So I was showing the beautiful tulips that I have in the champagne that I was toasting Marc with to sort of kick this off. But you know, the wonders of Zoom are absolutely great. So we have Mr. Taylor in Charleston, and we have Jack Carr up in Park City. Joshua, you are near Memphis, but not entirely there. Where are you, Don?
Austin, right?
Austin, yeah. Sorry, I had
Yeah.
to unmute.
If you're in Austin, you're really in the same snow belt then that Marc is currently in.
It was 5 degrees this morning with 6 inches of snow. It was horrible.
Wow. It's unbelievable.
So, hilariously, if Marc Cameron is able to join in, probably the guy from Alaska will be the one with loose weather.
Yeah, and Jack Carr is really unimpressed right now. He's gonna keep the face on where he doesn't show it, but he's like yawn, 6 inches of snow, because that's about what we had today too.
He's got a snowboard or a ski back there.
That is, yeah, 10th Mountain Division, actually. Yeah, 10th Mountain Division
Nice.
skis to give a little money to that association. But yeah, pretty cool. But I've been down south when the snow hits, and a little bit of snow, disaster. I got stuck on an overpass for like 10 hours once with my daughter on a trip, and yeah, a little bit of snow, shut down completely in Dallas.
Yeah, we've already started cannibalizing one another in just a few hours. That's all it takes.
So, Mr. Cameron, you've tuned in from Alaska. Are you snow or not snow compared to the rest of us?
No, we've had snow for about 3-4 months. Y'all come on up here and get warm though. It's like 18 degrees today. It's awesome.
Oh wow.
Now, I will tell you quickly before we switch over to Mr. Greaney that some years ago, my husband and I accepted an invitation to spend a week in St. Petersburg at the Hermitage with the Friends of the Hermitage Museum. And I was really excited. And I studied Russian at Stanford, so I was particularly excited. And they gave us a choice. We could go in October or we could go in December. So Rob is writing down October as I'm going, no, we're going to go in December. We're going to do the real Russian thing. Wow. So I worked out a flight plan where we could fly from Scottsdale to LA to Frankfurt, and Frankfurt to St. Petersburg, and then the reverse. We were the only people on the trip that actually got there and back. We landed in St. Petersburg. They were having a blizzard. The entire city was paralyzed. It took 2.5 hours to get from the airport to the hotel. The whole road from St. Petersburg to Moscow was completely bogged down, and they had people running around with hot tea and soup and so forth. And I said to Rob, clearly the Russians can only do snow with horses.
That's
and,
right.
You know, they were completely defeated by vehicles in the snow. So,
but you got the experience you were looking for. It might have been more than you wanted, but
it really did. Yeah, it was great. So, Joshua Hood, I know that you have read Relentless, because you and I talked recently with your Robert Ludlum book. And
I have it here.
Excellent. And you
sweet.
had a PDF. And so I'm thinking that it would be wonderful if you would like to kick us off by talking to Marc about his book, because my copies are down at the Poison Pen. Brad just got his today. I don't know if anyone else is actually.
I got mine finally.
Finally.
Marc writes, I used to write 2 books a year. Marc writes 2 books in a single book. I'm not finished, but I have started.
I love when people whine about how long the books are.
That's so funny. John, have you had a chance to read it too, or is Joshua the only one among us who could read it?
Josh is the only one among us.
All right.
A lot
I thought Patrick would switch us briefly to speaker view so Josh and Marc can take the screen, and then we're going to come back to gallery view. And I have a bunch of absolutely super intelligent, well thought out bullshit questions that I'm going to ask you. So, Patrick, are you ready? The black hole there. Maybe not. Maybe we'll just go on. So, Josh, what can you ask Marc about Relentless?
Well, I've got one of my questions here. Had to borrow my son's crayons, but Marc, as I was asking earlier, I don't know if my eyes are getting worse or if they're just shrinking the font because you keep writing really long books, but this one was a good one. And I had the first thing that I thought of, and we're not to give too much away, but Court kind of starts off behind the 8 ball a little bit. And I immediately start thinking about the time where you were at the clinic getting I think it was intravenous antibiotics at the same time that Amy was. You had the bone, wasn't it a bone infection after your surgery? And Amy had
Yeah.
something to do with a complication with the C-section.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking about how usually you like to train up, get on the range and stuff. And then you also like to go travel, do a little research before a book. So you didn't have, because of COVID, obviously, the opportunity to do either one of those. So I was curious, how did that process go when you were kind of just taken out of, besides being married, you were just kind of taken out of your process here? Stop laughing.
Well, yeah, I got lucky because the idea from the beginning, back before I knew what COVID was, and then even back when I knew what it was but didn't think it would affect me in any way, I had the plan of doing this book in Berlin. And I have been to Berlin several times. I lived in Cologne, Germany for a short time, a long time ago. And I've probably been to Berlin 10 times in my life and spent weeks there if you add it all up. So that was the setting of my book. So I remember like last March thinking, oh, everything's getting shut down. I won't be able to go to Berlin until like June. And then I was like, well, now I won't be able to go till July. And then it's like the book is due at the end of July. And I'm like, wow, I'm actually not going to get to do location research for this book, which is only the second time that I haven't been able to get to do location research. But I was fortunate because I knew the city pretty well. I know Germany really, really well. I was in Munich a couple years ago researching a book with RIP, Red Metal. And I was in Berlin researching a book I did with Tom Clancy called Command Authority, and had just been there as a tourist many times before. So I got really, really lucky. Like if I had based the book in Istanbul or Mumbai or something like that, I'd have been in trouble because I've never been there. But I wanted the hero to have some vulnerabilities that were not just the typical vulnerabilities of like bad guys trying to crack his skull. So I spend a lot of time thinking like a guy that does what this guy does, how he would suffer for the work that he does. And one of the things is just the wounds that he encounters. And at the end of the previous book, 1 minute out, he takes a pretty bad knife wound to his shoulder, and it doesn't seem like a big deal. He doesn't shake it off, but at least he's getting treatment at the end of the book. But at the beginning of this book, he is suffering from an infection that the knife caused. And like you just said, Josh, I myself 4 years ago, had a bone infection. I had a surgery on my foot and it didn't heal right. So I didn't want it to be, I wanted him to have some sort of injury that he starts the book off with that he has to manage throughout the story. It's just one little side plot. And I didn't want it to be, he's got a broken arm or a broken leg and he's walking around on crutches fighting the bad guys. That seemed kind of silly. So I thought about, an infection is something cooking inside you and something you have to take care of, or it's going to get worse. You can die. So that was the choice. And yeah, I drew on my own personal experience because this happened to me several years ago. My hero is able to do a lot of things that I wasn't able to do, but that's always the case. So yeah, it was just another vulnerability to give the character.
Well, I found it interesting because, Court is always his biggest ally. He's able to rely on himself and the skills that he has, but this time it's like his body and everything that he's used for so long is working against him. And the way you were able to navigate that, like, was interesting. I think we were talking, maybe Barbara, last time I was on here, about how you never get to see a character the day after, a book ends. And then this happens, and it's like pretty cool and pretty, I think it showed a different dimension of Court. Did you plan that going in?
Yeah, I wanted to show the grit of the character in ways other than the typical thing where he's got to vanquish X number of foes. All those things happen in this story. He just has to manage this other aspect of his life at the same time. And there's many points in the book where a lesser man would have just said, screw it. I need to get to bed. I'm not doing too good. But he has to sort of use his wits and things to overcome that. And it's always been important for me to have each book be a different, because I think that makes the series better. It's what I like to read when I read an author. I want to read them do something different each time. And also it's just more interesting to me. And this was just a way. I remember when I came up with the idea, it's like, well, nobody's going to read a book if this guy's like in a hospital ward or a wheelchair trying to manage the things that people want the hero to do. So it was kind of cutting this fine line between what he would physically be able to do and using his wits to overcome these things.
But it kind of levels the playing field, which is kind of in the opposite direction of what most people want to do. And I say that simply because the book before that, 1 Minute Out, you tried some stuff that I thought was like pretty ballsy, writing in a different point of view, and it obviously worked because you made #1. And so we go into this one. Did you feel any pressure? Like, holy shit, I just made #1 on the New York Times list. What do you do now?
I mean, the pressure is just not to write a book that sucks. And I'm very self-critical, and I'm a worrying author. The whole time I'm writing the book, I'm like, is this working? Is this terrible? Is this okay? So that's my motivation. It's not like I've got to hit #1 again. That's just something I absolutely can't control. I just want to write the best book that I can. And, I'm really happy with how Relentless turned out. But if we'd all gotten together early July or maybe mid-July and talked about Relentless, I wouldn't want to talk about it. I'd be like, oh my God, I'm 140,000 words into this book and I don't even know what's going on. It's just, once you get finished and once you go through the edits and then you go through the edits again, that's when you sort of find the story. And I've said this before, but when my book is 95% completed, I feel like if I died and somebody tried to read it, they wouldn't understand what was going on and who was who. I mean, you're just not satisfied until you have everything sort of put together. So it's always my motivation to write a really good book, because it's hard. This stuff is hard.
Can I jump in?
No. Sorry, Tom.
That's okay. I was just going to say that's really scary to think 95. I mean, I was trying to think. Kyle, who was it that took over? Wasn't it Kyle wrote a Vince Flynn book? Patrick, you should put us back on gallery view because I sound like I'm, in a well or something over here. Didn't Vince leave like 1 page or something? Jack, do you remember?
I don't remember if it was 1 page or not, but yeah, we have to ask Kyle exactly how many pages were left or what the guidepost was. And I think I've even asked him that question before in an interview. So now I feel bad I can't recall it right now, but there was some sort of a guide, I think, that
I think it was like the first chapter or something.
Yeah,
I've heard that story. Yeah.
Well, clearly, Mark, you're going to present, should you shuffle off before you finish your book, whoever's going to follow it up is going to be screwed.
Yeah.
They can't figure it out. So I was emailing with Brad Taylor earlier today. I didn't see Brad in January because I was away. So Brad, I'm thrilled to see you. How's your knee? Let me ask you that before we go on. Did you go ahead and have the knee replacement?
My knee still exists, put it that way. But I wish I hadn't have done it. So.
Really? Oh no, that sucks.
Yeah. It's been a mess.
I'm sorry.
I mean, it's not a bad mess in the sense that, I can't function. It's just, when you get your knee replaced and they say, I'm having trouble walking up the stairs and I can't run and I can't do this. And then you get your knee replaced and you say, you can't run, you can't do this. Like, why did I get my knee replaced?
Yeah.
Good point. Well, mine worked out really well. So maybe I'm just tougher than you are. But
very well could be. So, my daughter works at the medical clinic, says you got a bad doctor. I'm like, that's great.
Well, not every operation goes well. But since Josh and Mark brought this up, I thought of a number of questions when I was writing to Brad earlier today that I might ask. And one of them was going to be, what is the reasonable injury quotient? And how does an injury affect the character? How you write him thereafter? There are certainly instances where characters really suffer, but it's like they're Teflon and they just come right back and do well. So any of you want to talk about Mark has already told us. So Brad, since I was writing that to you, how do you deal with it?
I deal with, actually, that segues into my question I wanted for Mark.
Okay.
But I deal with it with that you have to remember what you did in the past. And I firmly believe in don't give him some kind of catastrophic. Pike is never going to break his hip. Put it that way, because that's
Or
like
his
a
knee.
2-year recovery. So most of the injuries I do are something that you can recover from, and then you'll have something in the book about what happened. But that's what I wanted to ask Mark was the Court Gentry books, because he's got a systemic problem that he's dealing with right now from a previous book. How do you deal with, or is the book, they're all standalones, but how do you deal with that? So there's some history there that if you are going to pick up, Relentless right now, and you've never read another Court Gentry book, he's dealing with an issue that happened in a previous book.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So they're all standalone books. And so basically in this book, you open it up to see this special operations guy, this guy that works as kind of a contract agent for the CIA, who's in a CIA medical facility in Virginia, and he's plucked out of there, not against his will, but against the doctors and medical advice, because he needs to be thrown back into the field. So you don't have to know what happened to him. And I mean, just sort of.
Oh, I see exactly what you're saying. So
yeah.
You
so
open the book up with him in the hospital.
Yeah. He's in the hospital, and he's being visited by the DDO, the Deputy Director of Operations, who's like, man, I tried to use somebody else. It got screwed up. I need you. And there's even a conversation between the DDO and the doctor. And he says, the DDO says, tell him he's okay, and he'll be okay. And the doctor's like, that's not really how medicine works. He's like, well, right now it's how national security works. So we're going to get
that's how it works in the NFL. Give him a shot.
Exactly. And so, I wanted, if someone's never read any of these books, they're going to open this book and they're going to be like, oh, wow, there's a guy who's bedridden, who's the hero, but he doesn't stay bedridden for long. He finds ways to manage what he's going through, and to
how much of the history of court do you put in each book? I mean, I've read the books, but I mean,
there's a part in the first, let's say, fifth of the book, let's say almost 2/5 in each of the books, where it sort of explains who he is and what he's doing. The books start with action, and it starts,
how hard do you find that to do?
To do it differently each time is hard.
I hate it. It's my worst thing ever.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, that you have to go like, okay, so he used to be here, and this guy they used to be after him, and now they're not after him, and blah 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 blah. And you just don't want that to read like some sort of like infomercial. So
exactly.
I've found different ways to do it, but I'm 10 books in. By the 20th book, I may just have a big rubber stamp for it's like, here's what you need to know. Boom.
Yeah,
I don't know how to.
Giving everybody a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
See my website. So Don, I saw you break up into laughter when I asked about injuries. So since you're going to be taking over writing Jack Ryan's Senior,
Junior.
You're doing Junior, and Mark is writing Jack Ryan Senior. So how have you dealt with the question of injuries, if any?
So in the way you remember Senior or Junior, Marc Cameron said, just keep this in mind. You write the young guys, I write the old guys. So I said, all right, exactly what he said. So, I think it's hard for a couple different reasons. Aside from books, one of the biggest influences on me are movies, and movies like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, and where you see, Die Hard, especially the first one, you see that character suffer, right? You see him at the end of it is bloody and he's barely making it in, and Mel Gibson can somehow dislocate his shoulder and relocate it and still, choke a guy out with a rear naked chokehold at the end. And so I think there's some balance that you have to do where the audience has to feel like the protagonist is actually at risk, that it can't be that it's just Superman. But then, and at the same time, like I think what Mark was saying, you want to bang them up a little bit, but it is hard, I think, to figure out how far you can go with that and how real it is. And I guess Mark, when you were writing Relentless, you obviously started with this knife wound. Did you have in your head how far you wanted to carry that through the book, or whether it was going to be an aspect of the entire thing? Or I guess, how did you navigate that?
I knew it was going to involve the whole story. He wasn't going to just say, be recovered halfway through. He was going to have to go do an operation in Venezuela and then in Berlin. And during that, while he was working on that operation, he had to find somebody that can give him the medicine he needs and can treat him. And then he also has to ultimately ends up having to protect her as well, because he's brought this woman, this young Turkish doctor, into his dangerous world. That's a thing. I mean, we probably all do it. You bring people in who are not of the world in which your hero or heroine resides, and that sort of, it shows the disconnect between these types of lives that these people live. And so in this book, he knows of this young Turkish doctor, and he goes to her and just, to her apartment. He just breaks into her apartment, waits for her to come home and says like, hey, I need some help. And she treats him. It's a little more complicated than that, but she treats him. And but he also has to protect her, because his mission, as far as he's concerned, it's very personal, but it's also very important to America. And so he's willing to take that chance. And so from the very beginning, when I started the book, it's like, all right, if I'm going to go down this road where the hero has this thing that he's dealing with, then I have to treat it honestly, just like any wound that somebody gets. If you guys have seen the Punisher TV series, the John Bernthal series, it's a fantastic series, but he's shot in the back with a crossbow bolt. And the next episode, there's no mention of it, but it's okay, because he's such a good actor. And the way it's written in this way that when he is injured with it, he absolutely is injured with it, and you feel it. And so you feel that skin in the game of the story, even if he recovers from it like weirdly quick, if you stop and think about it. Like, they sell it to you, and that's what we're all trying to do here, right? Is just sell our stories, like make them as believable as possible.
And so along that lines, in the first draft, when you're just going and you're pulling in every crazy idea and stuff you have you ever had the point where you're in court, gets run over by a dump truck and he smashes it, and then you're like, nah, I have to walk that back and change it? Have you gone too far maybe in the draft and then had to go back and fix things?
It's funny you say that, because the one time that really happened was when I was writing a Clancy book. So you and Mark will find this interesting. I don't remember if it was the first or second of the 7 Clancys that I did, but John Clark is captured by these Russians and tortured, and they chopped his ear off. And I finished the book with that, and I sent it to Tom Colgan, who is all of our editors, the editor of a lot of people here, not everybody. And Tom's like, yeah, no. So he ended up, some really bad things happened to John Clark. He was, Tom just said, let's pivot, let's do this. But he was right. It ended up being like it smashed his hand and some other stuff, but it was very, like, no big deal. But Tom was right. I mean, that was like a bridge too far for that.
That's what he says. That's what he says. A bridge too far. You've gone a bridge too far here.
That's probably what he said to me, for sure.
Marc Cameron, you're talking about, we're dealing with an older character when you're writing about Jack Ryan Sr. So, do you give the injuries to younger people who can more easily recover?
Well, I talk a lot about Clark's. I mean, Jack Ryan Sr. is behind the resolute desk, so he doesn't get injured much, except maybe emotionally. But Clark gets injured. Ding gets beaten up pretty bad in the book before last. Gets head injury in a plane crash. So I just try to I try to be like Mark in that regard, not go completely overboard. But in my own series, in the Jericho Quinn series, I have a lot of people will email me and say, boy, you're whittling stuff off this guy. He's lost an earlobe, a baby toe, got a big slash across his rib. One of his ribs is kind of like permanently detached from the rest. Nothing. And I'm an old horseshoer, so I know about working with injuries. And so I sort of, maybe like Mark channeled his infection, I channel my broken toe or my cracked ribs and stuff like that from horses. So try to keep it injuries, as Mark and everybody here has done, where he's hurt pretty bad, but you can gut it out and kind of continue on where a lesser person, man or woman, might not.
So Jack Carr, you took this up a step because you had your guy actually thinking about dying in his first book. So, you know.
That's right. But now people know if they know that there's a second one or a third one. So it only works really for the first book. And then if they just see, you know, online that there's a couple other ones, they kind of, it's not as much of a, you know, surprise as they get near the end. They kind of know where it's going. But yeah, that was a tool that I wanted to use for a long time, since I just grew up reading all these novels and kind of knew where I was headed after the military. I needed to have my guy actually go into battle thinking that he was already dead, so he would be allowed to do the things, and the reader would believe that he could do those things because he thought himself that he was already dead. So I used that in the first book, but yeah, it worked fairly well, I guess. But is it my turn to talk now? Do I get to ask a question?
Go ahead.
I'm in. But Marc, look, the last time I was out in public, I guess, well, I've been like 2 trips, but one was the fall and one was more recently. But our trip to Florida, the last thing we
last
did
March.
I was walking. That was crazy. I was walking down the gate, the plank to the plane, and I was getting this call from my doctor saying, "Turn around if you're not on the plane yet. You know, this thing is coming. This thing's gonna hit." And I was like, I didn't know what to do. So of course I went because, you know, we got to do it. But so that was awesome. That was the last time we were like out in public,
Same here.
signing, shaking hands,
Same here.
and all that sort of thing. And that was amazing. But I want to ask you about the Gray Man series, Netflix, right? Netflix. Yep. So, and I ask about that. So, 1, awesome, congratulations.
Thanks.
And 2, how involved are you in that process? Are you seeing scripts? Because it's going to come together, I think, fairly quickly, like this year and then into next, I think, anyway, from what I read. But how much are you involved, or are you just like hands off and doing your own thing? And then, just curious about level of involvement on that.
Yeah, it's supposed to start shooting March the 1st, and they haven't said when it's actually going to come out. It's going to Netflix, so it doesn't have to be scheduled for theaters, that sort of thing. So maybe it won't be as long as it would take to, you know, film a movie and then have that come out for you know, distribution. But I'm sure it'll be a year easily. But yeah, it's supposed to start March the 1st. They've already built sets. They've already got actors there in LA where they're going to do some shooting. So that's all pretty neat. I'm not officially involved in any way, shape, or form. Early on, the Russo brothers, who wrote the script and are directing it, they had me come out to California, and I spent a few days with them as they were working on the script and talking about the different, like where the story goes after book 1 and how I see the character and all those sorts of things. So they just involved me on their own, which was terrific. And I've stayed in touch with them, and I've stayed friends with them over the years. And they've reached out here and there over the last 5 years. And in July, when this whole thing came together, I'd been hearing rumors for a few months from my agent out in LA, but I initially optioned this film in September of 2009. So, you know, when you hear rumors about Ryan Gosling's interested and the Russos are back involved and they want to direct and turn it into a franchise, you know, you've heard so many rumors that you're just kind of like, okie doke, and then you go eat your lunch and you don't think anything, you know, about it. And you're like, well, that sounds nice, but you don't really believe it. And so when it all came together, I heard from the Russos pretty quickly after that. And I think they've reached out a couple other times about just little aspects here and there. So I have absolutely no official involvement. I read on the internet where sometimes things aren't the truth, I've learned over time. I read on the internet that, you know, like any author that doesn't, you know, demand full rights or whatever to their movie is an idiot and that sort of stuff. And that's just not really how things work. And as far as I'm concerned, the film is always going to be like the best possible advertisement for my series of books. And the directors are artists, and the actors are artists, and the screenwriters are artists, and they're all going to put their artistic vision on the story. So it's not going to be exactly like the book. I will say that I read 4 different scripts that have been written by different screenwriters over the years. Some of them very, very good, but the one that was closest to the original book, The Gray Man, was written by Joe Russo. He's since had other screenwriters come in and polish his script, I guess. But you know, I have complete confidence in them that they'll turn out a really, really good film.
Yeah, no, you have an awesome team. It's gonna crush. But I was thinking about that because I wanted to ask you, because if you were involved, you know, that's different than not being involved. Because if it's horrible, you can be like, hey, I wasn't involved, you know?
Yeah, right,
You got it.
right.
So for mine, I'm like, I'm involved. So if it's horrible, I can't say that.
Yeah.
So I thought that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, but the
yeah,
books
and the
are,
rights part of it too.
yeah, the books are always going to be there, and the books are always going to be the books. They're not going to change when the film changes. The film is always going to be there, and it's a different medium. So you just have to look at it like that. And there's a lot of people on the internet that are kind of like cranky about, like, you know, they're going to change this or they're going to change that. It's like, these are all artists, and they're not engineers hired to turn my page of writing into something visual. They're putting their own spin on things, and that's just kind of how the game is played.
So I have a question for all of you. In a time when selling books, sorry, being a bookseller, I have to ask this question, are always putting labels on things. So I guess my question is, what is it you think you're writing? Are we writing action adventure books? Are we writing political thrillers? Is it military fiction? What is an international thriller? How would each of you, if you were forced to call your book something, what would you call it? So Joshua, let's go back to you. You're writing, the one you and I have talked about twice now is the Treadstone aspect of the Ludlum universe. So what would you call them?
Well, I think like Jack Carr, I'm a big fan of the 80s. Like, I think those movies, you know, Commando and everything like that really shaped the way I look at books and everything else. So I got to look at what I'm writing. Obviously, you want some realism, but I look at it a lot like a comic book. You're writing huge characters and big gunfights that are hopefully entertaining, but I just try to go to that next level with what I'm doing, and that's how I look at it.
Anybody else? Brad?
I actually don't. I get asked that question a couple of times, and I don't know how to pigeonhole my books. I mean, my editor or my publisher calls them military thrillers, but the truth of the matter is, I don't have a whole lot of military in there. There's not 82nd Airborne tanks and aircraft carriers. On the other hand, I don't do a lot of politics in the books. In fact, I do no politics in the books. I just would say they're thrillers, really. I mean, because each one has been a little bit different. I mean, No Fortunate Son was a hostage thing with a component of personal vengeance, and other ones are straight up, you know, I'm going to go save the world because there's a bomb going off. I don't like getting pigeonholed, to be honest with you.
I don't like it either. And as you know, in the Poison Pen, we don't do that. But in the big world, they do put labels on books.
Yeah, and they're called military thrillers, which I always scratched my head about, saying, ain't no military in the book.
Where's the military?
Well, it might be your own background, which is another question I was going to ask you, but it might just be that the platform, your personal platform, like Jack's and like Joshua's, really push you in that direction. Don, I never did ask you what your own background was. Do you have a?
It's like Brad's, but cooler is actually. No, I was an Apache pilot and an FBI special agent. So, yeah.
Okay. And Mark, how about you?
Why does he have to come to
Mark,
me?
the other Mark.
Sorry. No, okay. You didn't come to me. Good. Okay.
Nope, I didn't. Marc Cameron.
I'm a retired deputy U.S. Marshal. So I spent about 30 years in law enforcement. So no military. My son was an OSI agent. He's now, I wrote a lot of OSI stories when he was still in, because his commanders would help me out and made the Air Force the hero, which is not super common. But yeah, my background is mostly as a day work cowboy and a deputy U.S. Marshal. So I draw a lot from that.
And Mr. Carr, we already know yours, but remind us for anybody who hasn't read you yet.
Well, that's right. I keep forgetting that we're not just talking to one another.
No, there's an actual audience out there, right?
The SEAL teams for 20 years, and then transition to this next chapter in life.
So basically, all of you do have some background in the kind of books you're writing. I was thinking back to Alistair MacLean, and I remember when you were talking, Mark Greaney, about infection and how you have to have regular medicine. You know, it's not like a cast on a broken bone or something. Did you all read Ice Station Zebra? Do you remember that a huge subplot of Ice Station Zebra was the diabetic and there's no
Yeah,
insulin?
that's
And
right.
so
Yeah.
it's like it's a ticking clock because this guy is going to die if they
Yeah.
can't manage to get him to a place where they can refresh his insulin supply. And so that's a different kind of a problem than a knife wound or a broken bone or some
Yeah.
such thing. But I always thought of those as action adventure, but now I run across terms like international thriller. But a question I would ask you, particularly in light of the events of January 6th and so forth, is it possible for your books to be looking at things like hacking and security and domestic terrorism, or is the thrust of them all really global for all of you? Do you really feel like, the theater for your books is not going to be focused more in on domestic terrorism, which is actually a lot more frightening at the moment than other kinds of terrorism? So who would like to answer
That's
that?
what I liked about Relentless is that there's a lot of things, speaking and not giving away the plot, but, talking about hacking and the NSA and things like that. There's a lot of timely issues in there that haven't been addressed in a lot of books before. And I remember vaguely talking to Marc when he was starting the book. He has an idea. He'll be like, "Oh, I'm thinking about writing about this." And so you just hear this tiny idea, and then to read the book, and you're like, "Damn, how do you write such a huge book off this tiny kernel?" But I think Relentless especially is one that has tackled a few issues that I haven't seen in thrillers or whatever you want to call them right now, which is, it's pretty refreshing, especially considering, what this is his 10th Gray Man, correct?
Yeah.
And you're always pushing the envelope and keeping them fresh.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you can do domestic for sure, even if these are international thrillers, which is what my books get called a lot. I kind of just call them espionage thrillers because that's what I read and that's what I liked and that's what I'm trying to, pull off, I guess. But I think, my 5th Gray Man book was called Backblast, and the entire book takes place in Washington, D.C. And it's probably my highest rated of the Gray Man books that have been released so far by the fans. And I don't think that's because it's in Washington, D.C., and I don't think that's because it's not in far afield in some other country. But I think it's because it's a very personal story to the hero. And I think that's the key that all books have to have. It can't just be your heroes trying to rescue somebody. It has to be that something is happening with your hero himself or herself. And Backblast was very much him trying to find out the origins of the problems that he's been dealing with. The CIA's got a kill order on him, and he's trying to get to the bottom of that and turn that around. And ultimately, that was probably Backblast is probably the book that's held in highest regard out of the 9 that have come out, previous to Relentless.
And I've got a scene that.
What's that?
He's got one of the greatest scenes in that book that I've told him I'm going to steal, and he's given me permission. So if you ever see it again, it's on the record. You said I could have it.
I was thinking about Stella Remington, who I don't think, no offense, Stella, but I doubt very much if she wrote her own books, but she was the head of, what was it, MI5 or MI6? I can't remember which when she retired. But I remember in her first book, her thesis was that the agent within, the native-born agent, was far more terrifying than any foreign agent because you can't really find them. So I was thinking, Jack, you've put your books out. I know we've been in Russia, we've been in, the Middle East and so forth. Can you imagine writing a book where, do Navy SEALs invade the Potomac Basin and try to, do something dramatic or what?
Yeah, I've talked to David Morrell about that very thing not that long ago, actually. So yeah, there's always things to explore, and that's what's fun about doing this, is being able to explore those things that are curious that you're curious about, or something that's a challenge, or both. And Marc's right, it's that personal side that I try to incorporate into all the novels, and I will continue to try to incorporate that into all the novels, so they all have heart. think that's the most important thing that for me, what I'm looking at as an author is I want these books to have heart, because I think that's what people can identify with as they're reading. But whether international or domestic and all that sort of thing, I mean, yeah, there's a lot. And what you just brought up is something that in this next novel that I have coming out that I use, but not in the exact way that we're talking about. It's kind of it's part of the twist. So I'll leave that one at that.
So Brad, you called your last book American Trader, the book that came out in January, and yet big swaths of it are set in Taiwan. Is your team, able to operate? I mean, sometimes the remit for the team or whatever it is you're writing is they have to operate on foreign soil. But what do you see your group doing?
Yeah, I could do either way. I mean, the American Trader thing, there's an American, obviously, that's a trader. But I've written several books that were, domestically based. And I mean, actually, Jack Carr mentioned David Morrell. Let's face some facts. Rambo was the original American terrorist, and he was running around America. So I don't think it's hard to actually write that story, and I've done it in the past. I wrote myself into a box with All Necessary Force was based in the United States. It was actually domestic terrorists had been radicalized in prisons, which happens, and they were taking out power stations. But I wrote myself in a box that the task force, my own creation, couldn't operate in the United States, which I was kicking myself. Why did I do that? So I had to figure out a way for them to operate in the United States, but that was all United States based, outside of, pikes running around the world trying to solve the problem. The end state is a domestic terrorist attack in the United States. So I agree with Jack, you could certainly do it. And before I lose the thing, I want to ask Marc a question. So you had when you talked about the Jack Ryan series and that you were talking to Marc about this, I don't know if it's Marc that told me or you told me, there was a huge Bible of characters and stuff that you passed off to him to allow him to write the series and that kind of stuff. And I wonder, do you do that for Court Gentry, or is that because you did it because you were picking up the Jack Ryan series and did a lot of research and took a lot of notes? Do you have something like that for the Court Gentry series? Because I really wish I'd have done that.
I wish I would have done it too. So yeah, what you're talking about, it wasn't Marc Cameron, it was Don Bentley.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah. So I told him, I said, I don't know if this will help you, but it's a few years old because I'm an old timer now. I don't know how the hell that happened. You and I, Brad, we basically started at the same time, and now Don Bentley and Jack Carr and Josh Hood are the new whippersnappers. And then Marc Cameron was writing Westerns since God knows when. So like he's his own anomaly. But so I had, and Don's going to hold it up right now. I'd read this book, Dead or Alive. So this is, you say it's a Bible, but it's really just a mess because I'm not a super organized guy. I read Dead or Alive which was the book before I started writing the Tom Clancy novels, the book that came out that was written by Grant Blackwood and Tom Clancy. And I read that thing page by page. And if it said somebody's hair color, I put a Post-it note in it, and it would be like, somebody's hair color, whatever. And then it's like, what gun this guy likes, or what city this is in. And I did that. And Don, you can show it. It's like hundreds of Post-it notes. It's obnoxious. And so that's literally, Don asked if he could have it, but I was like, I'm probably just making his situation more complicated because
spoon feeding Don Bentley.
No. I have a 12-year-old daughter who I pay $10 an hour to go through all the Marc's Post-it notes and turn it into a document. So that's
so you don't do that for Court Gentry.
I would love to do it for Court Gentry. So my next Gray Man novel, which I'm writing now, which will come out next year, involves him joining this CIA ground branch unit like 12 years earlier. And the book's called Sierra 6, and it's about him.
Title. What the hell?
It's all
He's
I have.
A freak, man. He's a freak.
I have the two words on the cover. I just have to add the 150,000 words.
It's my title for the new book was just axed, but go ahead.
This could be axed. Yeah, this is all. It's all tentative until they give you the thumbs up at the end. But so it involves things that have happened in the past, and I have just made references, as Brad, you and I have talked about this before. You know, it's like you make references to things in your series, and then you get bit in the butt later.
Exactly. That's why I'm asking it.
Yeah. So very early on in the Gray Man series, in the first book, I said he was from Tallahassee, Florida, the hero, and about 3 books later, I had forgotten that.
Yeah.
And I misremembered it, and I said he was from Jacksonville, Florida. So once I realized that I'd screwed that up in Backblast, which was book 5, he needed to go home and see his father and all this other stuff. I looked on a map and I found this town called Glen St. Mary, which is right between Tallahassee and Jacksonville, and that's where he's from. And so I cleaned up my own mess.
So it worked out really because it's close enough. You could say I'm from there because I'm from Conroe, Texas, which is close to Houston. I could say that. So
yeah. Sort of. If people give me a break, then yeah, I get away with it. But if people are going to be, hard nosed about it, I totally got busted there.
Well, actually, somebody mentioned Grant Black writing Jack Ryan. Was that you?
Grant Blackwood, yeah.
Yeah. So I just because it's kind of funny to me, I just got a 1-star review that said,
Brad, that was me like 45 seconds ago. You just you're making it sound like once upon a time I mentioned Grant Blackwood. It's like, come on, buddy, stick with us.
I'm drinking bourbon. So, Grant Black, I get a review that says, this is so much techno babble. It's just like Grant Black, who destroyed the Jack Reacher series. And I was like,
that was Don Bentley.
Yeah.
It probably was.
Yeah.
Actually, Marc Cameron, you probably inherited the guy that maybe even more than the Ludlum, that so much about Jack Ryan Sr. Was that at all intimidating to you?
Oh, it was very intimidating. And I don't want to make Don feel bad, but Mark wrote out all that stuff for me. He gave me it was like a document. I didn't have to. I didn't
that's
have
what
to
I thought. That's
flip
what I
through
was
anything.
talking to you, Mark. I
You know how much money I paid my father to do that?
I talked to Brad about this a long time ago.
So it wasn't just Don. I knew I was right on that.
Seriously.
No, Mark.
Don Bentley got a handful of Post-it notes.
Exactly. No, he gave me a very nice document, and yeah, none of that. I think he probably knows that I'm not a very smart man, so I gotta have it kind of spoon fed. But
well, by the time Don Bentley came along, I didn't remember any of that stuff. So I was like, here's my Post-it notes. That's all I've got. That's my only.
He's got his kid reading the Post-it notes, and you had your kids writing them.
Yeah, exactly.
Just give him this.
Well, there's a place in the universe, but actually, Joshua, I think I remember that Brian Freeman is going to be writing in the Ludlum universe, but he's going to be writing the Jason Bourne books, right?
Yeah, the second one, he wrote the first one, which was great, and the second one should be coming out soon. And I got off easy with Treadstone because there was really nothing, but thinking about having to follow in those shoes, and I think we've had conversations. Mark and Don is like, I have ADD. I can't even remember what shoes I'm wearing. So trying to keep all that straight, I'd be lost, even with Post-it notes.
Heck, you got off easier by creating your own universe. You and Brad actually got to do that, and without writing in somebody else's for a little while. Do you sometimes think it would have been helpful? Have you ever thought it might have been helpful if you'd started out to write in someone else's universe, or are you just gonna go it alone?
Never really thought about it. I never really, unless it wasn't an option coming from, just stepping out of the military and, no one knows who you are. You have no social media accounts. You have nothing published. You just have to start and create your own universe. So it wasn't ever really an option anyway. But I'm heavily influenced by all those guys, reading all with the Clancy's and David Morrell and Nelson DeMille and AJ Quinnell and JC Pollock and Mark Olden and all these guys that I read growing up, and then later Daniel Silva and Vince Flynn and Brad Thor and then Mark Greaney. And so all of that is influences somehow, just like my military experience influences somehow, and all the nonfiction that I did reading on warfare and terrorism and insurgencies and counterinsurgencies, all that kind of morphs together as I create this fictional universe.
Yeah, but Jack, when you're 10 books in, you're going to be going in book 2, I think I said that this guy's brother, was a cop, and then you have to go back and look through all that stuff. It's
oh, I do. I have the books next to me as I go already. I go back.
Yeah, it's
yes,
a
good problem to have. I think
I,
Stephen Hunter told me he had Bob Lee Swagger's wife named like 3 different names over the Bob Lee Swagger series because he's forgetting what her name is.
Can I,
Oh, yeah.
can I just say going along with that? So 4 of us on the call, Mark, Josh, the other Mark, and I all have the same editor. We all have Tom Colgan. And I have to give a shout out to Tom because I think he is part of what helps keep us going. And so when I got to do the Jack Ryan, he sat me down and he looked me in the eye and he said, Mark Greaney did an awesome job on this. Don't screw it up. And that is kind of like what I think we all get.
No pressure
Same
there.
thing.
Right. So a corollary question, Jack didn't bring up the fact that he's a tremendous Clive Cussler fan because Jack was able to come down and join a Clive Cussler event with me. And Mark and Jack and Stephen Hunter and I did something which I thought was absolutely wonderful. So, I guess that comes back to my question. Isn't so much what labels do we need to use, but who's the audience for all of this? And I think that what we're showing is that there's a vast audience for books that are satisfying for the various reasons we've talked about. There is action, there is adventure, there is global stuff, there is, in some cases, political stuff. People get hurt, people have love affairs, bad things happen. But what do you think the unifying factor is? Is it the pace? Is it the thrills? Because the thriller is really different than a mystery or detective story.
To me, it's the characters. It's the characters over and over and over again. Watership Down is one of my favorite books, and that they're a bunch of rabbits, but they're characters. And I think that you don't. Nobody wants to read a book that they have to get emotionally involved with the characters. And if you don't get emotionally involved with the characters, then you don't finish the book. You just don't. To me, it's the characters. Pace and setting and all that's important. But if you cannot get a reader emotionally involved with the characters, they're not going to enjoy the book.
So let me ask you this. Because there are more women serving in the military, you have got women in your task force group, and they seem to be up or maybe even tougher. James Rollins involves, he has women, Saichun in particular, in his series. And I was reading about Alvin York the other day. There's a new biography out of Sergeant Alvin York, and 16 guys at the Argonne Forest, and 13 of them earned congressional medals of honor. I mean, how amazing is that? But there were no women involved because women really weren't given weapons and sent into the trenches. But today, if you're doing drone warfare and other stuff, gender doesn't, or physical strength doesn't really have all that much to do with it. Do you see any of you bringing, and I'm not asking this from a feminist standpoint because, that's not me. I've never been treated worse because I was a woman, so I'm not really a part of the whole feminist movement, as you might surmise. But do any of you feel like, women can play a bigger part in your books? Jack, that might be a really interesting question for you. Are there any women SEALs?
I haven't been keeping up. I think there's a couple who have tried now that they're allowed, and I don't think anyone has yet made it through. But that could have changed today. Who knows? But I think that's one of the reasons that Emily Bessler liked my book when it ended up on her desk, is because I had 2 strong female characters in that first one. And in this fourth one, I have a new female character who's also very strong and very different. But I didn't think about that ahead of time. Like, what I need to do is put some strong female characters in here because maybe a female editor will read it. Or I didn't think about that at all. Or maybe they're female readers. All I did was write the story. But I just grew up with, my mom was a librarian, and my mom and my grandmother are very strong people. And my grandmother grew up during the Depression. And so that was a big part of our lives, hearing those stories, and it influenced how she lived the rest of her life. So I was just surrounded by strong female role models on the personal side of the house all my life. So it was just natural for me to incorporate them. And then I think that actually helped when it did get to New York to have strong female characters that were in there naturally. I think it really, really helped when it ended up on Emily's desk.
Brad, why did you put women into the task force?
I originally wanted to write a story of redemption. People say, write what you know. If I'd have been a cop, Pike would have been a policeman. If I'd have been a priest, Jennifer would have been a nun. I wrote a story of redemption. I was a counterterrorist, commando. So that's what he became. And she was in it from the get-go. And just like Jack said, I didn't even think the book would get published. I just wrote it in there because I thought that's what I wanted to write in there. I mean, I loved Romancing the Stone as a movie. I mean, I'm writing something that I wanted to read. And I've done that ever since. And, Shoshana, people talk about Shoshana as being a super strong female character, which she is, but she was the antithesis of Pike. If you had two magnets that stuck together, they would repel each other. That's what she was. And since Pike was a male, I made her a female. I didn't do it on any certain way to do it. I've served with plenty of super strong females, I'll tell you that. So they've helped me craft the story, but I didn't set out to do it for any, marketing reason. I didn't think I'd be published.
They can be antagonists too. I think one of Hunter's absolutely best books is the one with the Russian sniper in it, the woman. I'm trying to remember if is that the one called Ice Sniper?
I think it's the other one. There's Ice Sniper, and all my books are in boxes, about to move in. They're supposed to
I just forget titles, but I thought that the woman, the Russian sniper, was just one of the best characters that he ever wrote. It was fabulous. Marc Greaney, how about you? What do you think about all this?
Well, yeah, so I have a female antagonist who's recurrent in my series, and I have a female protagonist who's recurrent, Zoya Zakharova, who's former Russian foreign intelligence SVR operative, who's kind of an on again, off again love interest of my hero, but she also has her own plot lines. There's an entire book dedicated or devoted to her and her story with her father, who is the head of the GRU. So she's a protagonist, and then there's a woman named Suzanne Brewer, who is a programs and plans officer for the CIA, who for some very, very personal reasons or sociopathic reasons is desperately trying to kill the gray man while she is his handler at the same time, or basically the person who's supposed to help him make his way through the field is actively trying to undermine him at different points in the story. So I just think it's fun. I mean, I don't do it for any sort of check off a box because male or female. I just the human condition is what we're all writing about, and it's interesting to me. And there's multiple angles to approach these things from, and Zoya as the Russian foreign intelligence person, it was just interesting to make her as a female and how she is a foil to Court and how they ally with each other. So it's just a fun part. It's the last part of that is, I grew up reading Clancy books, and Mary Pat Foley, as Marc Cameron well knows, is like one of the main characters, and she's a former CIA. She and her husband Ed are husband and wife CIA in Moscow, and I always liked her when I was reading her when I was 19 years old. So when I started writing Clancy books, she became, I guess, the head of the National Counterterrorism Center, and then she became, I think, deputy director of the CIA. It's been a couple of years, but she was just a character that I just thought was powerful and cool. And it wasn't that she was a woman; it was just that Mary Pat just kicked ass, and that's what I wanted to write about.
Maybe we should invite Patrick to come back in, filling up the black box here, and see if we have questions from anybody who happens to be watching. Patrick?
Oh, and it's Sniper's Honor is the Stephen Hunter novel.
Sniper's Honor. Thank you, Jay.
Been working on that.
Well, we have a lot of people watching, and I think they're all getting drunk, though. They seem to all be sipping bourbon and whiskey, and no, I'm just kidding. Let's see. Yeah, lots of questions. Gerald asks, since most of you have continued series by successful authors who have passed away, how much leeway do you get with their characters? Is there a Bible in place for the series? How far can you stretch things? I'm not sure who to address first. I know Marc, maybe.
Yeah, I will start. I'll kick it off to Cameron, and he can kick it off to Bentley, who can kick it off to Josh because he does it too. There was no Clancy Bible whatsoever. It was just read the books and do your best and know the series. But really the leeway comes from the editor, Tom Colgan. I mean, he'll thumbs up or thumbs down an idea depending on whether he thinks it's something that the Clancy universe would do. And there were times where I would write things 4 books in, 5 books in, 6 books in, and I would go to Tom. I'd be like, this doesn't sound really Clancy, but I think it's cool. But it didn't really fit the mold. So that, you know, there wasn't a Bible, but there's definitely this very strong steward over the Clancy universe, at least. What would you say, Mark?
Well, I think there's a real dichotomy between people that only know Jack Ryan and Clark and Dean from the movies and from Clancy's books and your books and now my books. Some people will, and I'm pretty adamant that I don't read my Amazon reviews, but I get a lot of emails, and if I make an error, boy, they'll, like, from the movies, I get most of my stuff, like, you've made Clark out to be this cruel, mean badass, and he's not that way. I'm like, dude, you need to go back and read Without Remorse and, you know, see what Clark is like. And I think reading your Bible, chatting, you know, just calling when I have a question, trying to stay true to the characters, whether they're Tom Clancy's or whether it's Adara, who's another kick-ass female that I think you came up with, or
I did, yeah,
or Midas. I try to just get to know those characters, and then I think the leeway comes with how I utilize them. One of the things that Tom is really pretty adamant about is no public displays of affection. I can't have Adara put her hand on Dom's knee, even though I think she does. I guess that's one of those things that Clancy book won't have. So he's pretty good gatekeeper when it comes to that. But I just try to stay true to the, like Clark, for instance. He's an older guy. I try to keep him doing his adventures as an older guy, but after you smashed his hand with a hammer, I gave him back a single action 45 because I've had a wrist injury and I know how much easier it is to shoot a single action. So just staying true to what you wrote and what, because I got the same talk Don Bentley did. Don't screw up what Mark Greaney did. So just try to stay true to him.
How about you, Don?
Yeah, so I sent my Tom Colgan Target acquired last night. So we'll see how far.
Oh, good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I've read part of it. It's good. It's really good.
Thank you. I still need a minute to think about this Bible that Mark got that I didn't get. But
I don't recall this, honestly.
It's really only about 4 pages. You probably got more, but it sure helped me.
The other thing I'll say that's a little bit interesting that people don't realize is, so Mike Madden wrote before me and did a fantastic job. And so I read Mike's book beforehand and said, okay, I see where he was going. There's nothing here that's going to affect what I thought I was going to do. But then I forgot about my buddy, Marc Cameron, where Mark writes a book, I write a book, Mark writes a book. And so Mark did something at the end of his book that I was 70,000 words into mine before I realized he did it. And so I had to go back and look at him and give him all kinds of stuff, but very quietly, because Mark is a big, intimidating guy. And so at the end of Target Acquired, I actually put Jack Ryan Sr. in a coma. And so I'm hoping Mark can do something with that. We'll just see what happens.
Yeah.
Let's see how I can handle that.
That's his problem. You guys will just hit it back over the net for year after year. It'd be fun.
I love it. Joshua, you didn't weigh in on this question. What would you say?
Well, like I said earlier, mine was a little different. I wasn't allowed to talk about Jason Bourne at all. And so everything about Treadstone, I had to kind of go back and, like they said, balance the movies with the books whenever they talked about Treadstone. And then I think that most people view Ludlam today as, what they've seen in the movie. And in those things, you have these Treadstones are kind of lackeys. And so it was trying to kind of rebuild what he had, because you had Jason Bourne, who I couldn't talk about or use, and then he's kicking the crap out of everybody in Treadstone. And so it was kind of working with what I had there. And so I got lucky in that there was no Bible to pass off. He just said, hey, we want a book about Treadstone, and do what you can, just don't talk about Jason Bourne. And so I just kind of built it from there. And luckily I had I talked to Mark a lot because I know he had gone through similar things with Clancy. And then once again, I had Tom Colgan to kind of hold my hand and not get too upset at me when I, didn't make certain marks.
Patrick, another question?
Yeah, actually, this is a good question. Chris asks about, says there are many great narrators for your audiobooks. Do the authors get a list to pick from? How does that process work? How do they get the same narrators to continue through the series?
Well, I'll start with that. I was given two choices and I picked one and I'm super happy with him. Like I got really lucky. The two they gave me were both great. And the guy I picked, Jay Snyder, did a really good job. And every year I have people saying, will Jay read your next book? That you need to keep him and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And I'm always like, well, it's kind of up to him every year. It's not like you have like a 10-book contract with the audio narrator, but I have had the same narrator for all 10 of my Gray Man books, which is great in the audio play, realm. So I'm happy to have that. I don't know about the rest of you guys though.
I'll pile in on that. So I had a different experience. So I had, when I originally was doing audio, we didn't do it in-house. And so I sold the rights to it. And so I had a different narrator for the first 3 books, in fact, for one book, I had like 3 different narrators narrating the different pieces of the book. And it was a convoluted mess. And I used to get all kinds of hate mail, and I would tell them, I don't have any control over this.
Yeah.
They're doing it. I can't solve this. And then I got Rich Orlow in-house, and he did a book, and then the next book, and it's just like what Mark said. Everybody loves him. And so when I moved publishing houses, I actually asked him, can I, who does the narrating for this stuff? And he said, my editor said, who would you like? And I said, I want Rich Orlow. And they contacted Rich. At this point, we had an email conversation going because he would ask me questions about acronyms and things like that. And so he knew me. We've never even officially met, but he knew me over email. And so I said I'd like him, and asked him if he'll do it, and he agreed to do it. So it's the same thing. I'm sticking with him.
Jack, what about you?
Yeah, I think everybody has a little bit different experience, but I'm a reader, so I have physical books. I've never been an audio person. So Simon & Schuster emailed me one afternoon before the first book came out and said, hey, how does this person sound? And I listened to it and I said, oh, that's probably not the right person. They said, okay, just go ahead and choose somebody, let us know, and we'll contact them and see if they want to do it. And I was like, okay, when do I need to do that? And they said by the end of business today. And it was like noon or 1 in Park City. I'm like, okay. And then I started listening to sample after sample after sample. And I found Ray Porter, and I listened to on a nonfiction, I think. And then I listened to a bunch of his fiction. And then I said, okay, this guy sounds great. And sent that to Simon & Schuster, and they said, yeah, we'll reach out to him. And they did. And I had no idea at the time that narrators bring a whole nother audience, that people will follow a narrator around from books. I had no idea because I wasn't an audiobook person. And so I just got really lucky that Ray Porter said yes. And he's been fantastic. It was up for Audiobook of the Year in 2018. So we went to New York and put on the tuxes and had drinks together. And now we're dear friends. And he's just an awesome guy, such a kind heart, and just an amazing person. So that's how that one worked out. But I'm guessing everybody has a little bit different experience with how their narrator gets chosen.
You're right that narrators can have real audiences. We did an event a couple of books back with Steve Berry and his audio reader, and the audio guy pulled in a huge, remember that, Patrick?
Sure
there
did.
were as many people there for the audio guy as there were for Steve. We had people running out of the door. It was very impressive. Anybody else want to comment? Or, are the franchise things, do you get any say in it? Or is that basically...
Scott Brick does the Clancy's, and he does a great job.
He's very good, isn't he? Right. Patrick, another question?
Yeah, it's funny how that seems to be the single biggest growth, in this business is the audiobook market. It's amazing how much it's boomed. Perhaps even more so than the ebook. I don't know. What do you think, Barbara?
Well, I think it has. And actually, guys, since we are doing podcasts of all these virtual events, we're up to something like 66,000 or 68,000 downloads of the podcast. Because Rob, my husband, turns the audio from the Zoom into a podcast. And not everybody wants to sit and look at a screen. So the podcasts have been great. And then one of our customers discovered that if Patrick puts them up on YouTube, she can watch them on her smart TV. So she likes that better than watching, a computer screen. So it's really interesting, the directions that the channels that you wind up using to get to customers. We've been surprised. So anyway, if that's true of the podcast, it would certainly be true that the audiobook market is really absolutely boomed. Patrick, anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, Don, Tom Colgan has chimed in, and he says,
"You're fired."
He says, the book's aight.
Thought you were gonna say he had the Bible.
That's not true. And then he goes back and says it's terrific. So, but a question for Greaney. How much, and probably for all you guys, how much of an influence was Vince Flynn's work on the Gray Man series?
Well, I'd read Vince Flynn. I don't know when I started. I was a big fan of it. I loved his sort of origin story of how Mitch Rapp, came to be, the Pan Am 103 bombing and all that. And it really spoke to me because I'm essentially the same age. I think Vince was like 2 years older than me or something, but I'm virtually the same age. And I got locked into his stories very early on. I love what Kyle Mills has done twice. I almost never do this because I always have stacks of books that I'm supposed to blurb, and then I have stacks of books or things on my Kindle that I have to research for whatever my work in progress is. So I almost never do this, but 2 times I have gotten on a plane and didn't really have anything to read for the next 3-4 hours or something. And both times I bought one of Kyle's Vince Flynn's books and just read every second I was on the plane. And I was like, I'm kind of a blue collar guy mentally. And it's just like a book as something that, that achieves something or accomplishes something or is used for something tangible is real nice to me. Like when I get emails from people like, we were snowed in for a blizzard and I spent 12 hours reading, Gunmetal Grade or something like that resonates with me because I books have done that for me in my life, And so I'm a big fan of the Vince Flynn stuff, obviously that Vince wrote, but also where Kyle's gone with it, just because you can just pick those books up and just delve into that world. So it has had an effect on me for sure.
Okay, well, I have some people chiming in. They're talking about Jack Carr on the Rogan podcast and how epic that was. That's a lot of fun to watch.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. And a lot of people are just chiming in about audiobooks and how that's the, one of the main ways that they listen to thrillers and things like that. I guess one question that kind of keeps coming up is just the challenges of keeping a series going over the long haul. And, Brad and Mark, you both kind of touched on that a little bit. How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep, and do you have, for Mark in particular, do you have an end game in sight, or do you even want to say that?
I do not have an end game in sight. I don't know about Brad. I enjoy doing Gray Man books. There's other things I want to do, and there's other things I have done, and I have these aspirational ideas of stories. One thing I'm not running out of is ideas to write about books. Now, on the day, writing my 1,000 words a day or 1,200 words a day that I'm trying to write, there's all sorts of problems. I'm trying to, have 2 guys walk up a staircase in a way that I haven't done before. That's where it gets tough. But as far as like a general idea about a book, I've got a lot more Gray Man books, and I have a lot more kind of aspirational stories that have nothing to do with the Gray Man. I just recently got a 2-book deal to write another series, which I'm working on now, and which is based on something that I wrote as an audio play or a scripted audio drama, which has already been optioned by Michael Bay in Hollywood. So that's something that'll
Can I interrupt here?
Yes, sir.
This is disgusting.
Oh, disgusting is the word.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man. You're a writing machine. So
Well,
you got
my brain will explode any day now, though. I mean, this is not a sustainable life. But I've been
Brad,
doing
didn't
it
you
for,
write 2 books a year forever and a novella as well on top of
We're
that?
not here to talk
okay,
about
this guy's writing movie scripts and talking to Michael Bay while writing
You
a
were
book.
writing like
And I
2
must show you
books
the
a
size
day.
of this book.
We're not here to talk
While
about
writing a book like this
Not
once a
here
year.
for that. Hey,
I asked Brad once if he writes with both hands.
no,
Hey,
so
bro, come here.
going back to what the question was for Mark, I have to say, Mark,
Aw. Hey, Jake. Sorry, Don. You've been upstage. You've been upstage, sir.
Never compete
What's
with
up,
dogs
Jake?
and kids. The no, when people ask me what Marc Greaney book they should start with, I always say to start with The Gray Man, and I think your opening sequence in the first Gray Man series is by far one of the best in this genre, and I'm curious how you came about that or where that came from, because when you talk about keeping a series fresh, to me it also, is that first book still relevant, because that's what people come back to begin with.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, especially because you were a helicopter pilot and the first scene of the first Gray Man is a helicopter crash. So I appreciate you saying that. But honestly, I wrote that book like 4 days after my agent had read a court gentry book that I'd written and spent a year on. He wasn't even my agent. Scott Miller, the man who is my agent. I wanted him to be my agent. I wrote an entire book for him about this guy, Court Gentry. He read it and he said, no, thanks. He said, I really love the hero. He's a great hero, but the story's not that great. If you wrote something else, I'd love to look at it. I spent like a couple days crying into my beer. And then I just came up with this story. He actually directed me. He said there's a subplot in the book that I wrote about all these different kill teams trying to kill the Gray Man while he's doing his operation that he thought was interesting. So I needed to start him off somewhere and have him have something go wrong. And I wanted to show his kind of moral compass working against him and just starting this, cascade of unfortunate events for the hero. And that's just where I got the idea. And it was July of 2007. I remember exactly where I was sitting when I wrote the first, page of Gray Man, and I had it finished by December. And, my first book took me 15 years to write, and Gray Man was my 4th book, and I wrote it in 6 months, just before work. So it was, I won't say I had a muse, but I definitely had, a mental timeline. And I felt that momentum of an agent going like, you're a good writer. I don't like this book that you just gave me, but I bet you can do something that I could publish. And that's all I needed to spend the next 6 months just, living at Starbucks when I wasn't at work writing.
I have a question for Cameron, which is, sorry by using the last name just to differentiate you guys. Let's see. Charles asks, Mark, any thoughts on Jack Ryan Sr. leaving office or moving on? Is there a series after the presidency?
No. those are all better directed towards Tom Colgan, but no, not right now. We sort of suspended time, so it's they've aged, and Mark and I have talked about this kind of ad nauseum the last time we were on, and they aged things along, and I pretty much have their adventures happening within weeks of each other. Every book, although I pull in things going on in the in the zeitgeist right now, I have them sort of frozen in time. So everybody's just going to stay the same age until Tom tells me to do differently. There's plenty of things that Jack can do. I don't know how many I have in me. I can see 7 books. I mean, my hat's off to you, sir, but that's a lot of plot for these great big giant characters.
Yeah, let me say something to that. I had this idea and I think I've told you this, Mark, where I explained how Jack Ryan Sr. was still the president, because I was getting emails going, how's he still the president? Well, he actually left office during his first term, and the Constitution says you can serve 2 full terms. So I explained that in one of the books, like my 3rd Clancy book or something like that. And I went at length to explain how this is feasible. And our editor, who we keep mentioning, Tom Colgan, came back and he's like, just don't bring that stuff up, man. He's like,
I'm so glad he did.
Yeah, same here, because it drags the book down, and it's like there's this great movie called Face Off that maybe you've all seen with Nicolas Cage and John Travolta, and it has a ridiculous premise where they change faces and whatever. And late in the story, in the movie, John Travolta is explaining to his wife everything that happened. And I remember when I watched it, I was like, look, it was hard enough to buy into that once. Now that you're explaining it to somebody, I'm totally calling BS on it. And it's this is a mistake. And it was the exact same thing. It was just sort of like, okay, everything is in its world. My hero really hasn't aged in the 10 years that I've been writing him. So it's just the way you do it.
It is the way you do it. You know, guys, I think I'm going to call time because 90 minutes is an awful long time to sit here. But it's been wonderful. I run around the screen, and just quite tonight, we are with Marc Greaney on the virtual launch for his 20th book in 10th Gray Map. Really exciting. And we have autographed copies. Joshua Treadwell, I love it. Joshua Hood was with us a couple of weeks ago for his second Treadwell book, and we have autographed copies of that. Brad Taylor, we missed you in January, but we have a plan to do, because we did do this with Brad Thor, a follow-up book discussion event in which everybody who comes is presumed or warned to have read the book, because then we can talk about it all the way through, including the end. And I think that's a really good idea. Don Bentley will be with us on March the 3rd to The Outside Man, and Jack Carr is going to kindly be hosting him. Jack Carr is going to kick off his 4th book on April 12th. It'll be the national launch for that. And you and I need to talk about how many books you're going to sign and where. And then Marc Cameron, you're booked here someplace in early May. I've forgotten the date. And that will be for not the Clancy book, but for your own series. For
right.
Yep. And we may have an Alaskan author who will join you, provided I kick her butt hard enough. Right. So in any case, it's just so much fun to talk to all of you. And I really thought the conclusion I came to is there is a vast audience for all the variations in what you write, because none of these books are exactly the same. They have all kinds of wonderful, unique features, as well as some common features. And we have guys not with us tonight, like Kyle Mills and Brad Thor and Stephen Hunter and many more. And I think it's exciting that you've got this whole community of audience and authors that are so supportive of each other. So I thank you guys who joined us for the surprise party for Marc, which may not have been a surprise, but he was good enough to pretend that it was.
I didn't know who was going to be here.
I suspect that, well, we did tell you a special guest, but I figured there might be a leak. And Patrick, thank you once again for your wonderful job setting it up and emceeing it. And thank you all, audience, for joining us on President's Day, which it turned out to be, which I didn't realize at the time. So let me say goodnight to everybody and thank you for joining us.
Thanks. And thanks, Barbara. And thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Congrats, Marc.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Quick correction that the characters tread stone. I could see Josh.
Did I say treadwheel all the way through? I'm sorry, Josh.
Josh kind of like taking a hit each time you said it.
It hurts.
You know what?
She got my name right.
Hey, you know what? Everybody needs an editor. Leave this thought that everybody.
I want to say one thing before we close out is that after looking at all the Zoom screens, Marc clearly has this thing wired tight.
And it's his guest house.
It really does have a beautiful, and check the painting. I want to, next time we do this, Marc, we're going to zoom in on the painting. Right, Patrick, I'm going to let you in the meeting for everybody. Okay, good night.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Good night.